go over how to not, you know, what's it's all about. Not dive into all the math. You don't need that. And I can't do it. Next. So, you know, steam engines, next, and the brain, yeah, they all obey the law, okay? It's not, it looks so different, but they're not. Next. And like any Shakespeare drama, you have an international, I've spent more time with these dudes up there than I care to, you know, Ludwig Boltzmann, Hosea Willard Gibbs, Rudolf Clausius, James Maxwell. These are amazing, okay? Next slide. Essentially, this is the law, okay? G is Gibbs free energy. Anytime you want to do work, you need Gibbs free energy from some source. And in the engine, it's pressure and volume, internal energy, temperature, and entropy. Next slide. So, when you have a steam engine, you heat up water, steam expands, increases pressure, and drives an engine. I mean, literally, that's the concept. Internal energy, E. Of course, this is E equals mc squared. Next slide. The very famous energy and mass equivalence of Einstein. Next slide. So let's just hold this slide. I have told you that when you increase or change pH of water, you need some energy. And you can do calculations. This is actually standard mathematics, nothing genius. If you want to change pH by 1 unit up, you need this much energy, delta G of 24 milliequivalent volts. Okay? Oh. So we have to ask ourselves, where did that energy come from? What's this thing and this? How did this change? Where's this energy coming from? Next slide. So we have to say, did the pressure in the room change? No. The volume change? Did the room fly apart? No. Did the internal energy change somehow? No. Temperature? The temperature was, yeah, it did those oscillations, but it was otherwise not burning up or cooling down. Where did this energy come from? And there could only be one place. Next slide. Entropy. Entropy. Next slide. Entropy is one of the most confusing thermodynamic terms because there's so many interpretations, but essentially entropy means disorder. Disorder is more likely than order. Next slide. Your cup of coffee has delta G in it, and it cools off over time. And it loses that energy, but it never goes back. You don't see a cold item giving heat to a hotter item. That's essentially the second law in a nutshell, okay? So entropy is very interesting because that's related to information. Next slide. And information, this is why we have our information age is Claude Shannon. Next slide. So actually, I translated Claude Shannon, father of information theory, into zeros and ones, bits, you know. So that you can do that. You can write Claude Shannon, translate to Swahili, and you'll get that. You can do, you know, bits, and you'll get that. So it's pretty cool. Next slide. Hold that. It takes energy to put things away. And if I had a messy office, I could just put things away. But you need information to make sense of that energy. You need both. So this is it's a simplistic way to look at the connection between energy and information, but I think it gets the point across. And Tiller's office does look like that. Next. So we come to this question, what does consciousness do? Next. Next. We are creating that information. We are writing change of pH. We are writing, I want to do this or that. I want to achieve this or that. We are looking at the stars at the night and we make order out of disorder. We are creating, you know, Taurus and Virgos from these points of light in our sky. We are creating order all the time. It's the human mind. Next. But we come back to this question of space, because I've told you there's a bridge here from that space that Tiller found, that what he calls space conditioning, and what the relics did. Next, let's go to the most important thing. Okay, this graph simply shows that we are over here, unconditioned, uncoupled. So in my lab, if I did this experiment, I would be over here, U1 gauge. It's just, gauge theory talks about symmetries, and even space has symmetries. The physical vacuum has symmetries. And when I talk about the vacuum, there's no physical stuff. Doesn't mean there's no stuff. There's no electrons and things that we normally think about as matter, okay? So you have normal reality, and then you have the higher reality, which is to the right here. Next. So let's look at this question about Tiller's work, and now let's look at the relics. And look at the similarities. The relics are like a device. 2,600-year-old device, and it's still going strong. Its half-life is who knows how many more centuries. It's wrapped and protected in a case and brought from city to city for the tours. Tiller's device, simple electric device, it's wrapped and protected, and it's transported to Minnesota for the experiment. Can you see the similarities here? A human did this, and an avatar did this kind of a device, but they are devices. Next. Tiller always says that his device is like Model T. And I thought, okay, then Buddha Relics is like the Pagani car. I was in Beverly Hills a few months ago, and I don't know if anyone's seen a Pagani, and I went, oh, whoa, that's awesome. That's an awesome car. So I just thought, it's not a Ferrari or Lamborghini, it's a Pagani, okay? So the Buddha's Relics and the Tiller, it was just a fun little slide I put together. Okay, next. I'm glad you get the humor in there. So the question then is, do the Buddha's relics condition the space? Because I gave you a number of the delta G of just changing one pH unit of 24 milli-electron volts. So let's ask that question. Next. This is our living room in Los Angeles. And as the case came home that night, this is what it felt like within a few seconds. Next. It felt like this. Go back. Go back. This is where we have coffee and read newspapers. Wall Street Journal, to be exact. Next. And this is what it felt like. The light bulbs went, pew, our toaster busted. It was so incredible. I mean, really. But notice, a few seconds. Tiller's device took 6 weeks to, up to 2 months initially. Now his labs are conditioned. They're doing things, okay? They're just conditioned, and he's able to pump it up with his intention. Space is the important bit. So this is what we did. Next slide. I took several of the Tiller devices when the relics came home. I put them under the table. I didn't make any intention. I felt that my action was my intention expressing itself. And so for the whole 3 days that the relics were home, the devices were there. In being imprinted with that loving kindness energy. I should really say information. That's a more accurate word. Next. So I gave one of this relic imprinted device to Dr. Tiller, and I said, let's try. Because you're saying something happens to your space, and we can quantify that conditioning. And it seems to me that the relics have a very robust response. And so we did. First, we measured the background of the casita. It was a small room in Scottsdale, and nothing, usual current, nothing interesting was going on. It was completely ordinary space. And then Tiller put the device and the water. Because the theory is if you condition the space, the water pH is going to change. And so we were very excited, so excited. I thought, oh man, this is awesome experiment, No brain, tabletop, we're going to get an amazing answer. And then nothing happened. Nothing happened. It was really devastating. And then I remember this morning, I remember the morning in Scottsdale when the answer came to me. And I bet some of you already got the answer too. We are living in U1 gauge, normal reality. This is where particle physics and, standard model, the Higgs boson, all that is here, okay? U1 gauge. Tiller is on the next realm. It's not electromagnetic anymore. We're talking about non-dispersive mediums and physical vacuum, SU2. But where do you think the relics are? They were much higher. Remember I said we need the right tools. We didn't have adequatio in our own setup. I was relieved. I thought, okay, it's not a failure. This is a great insight. Next slide. So the relics are not at SU2. They're way above. They cannot speak to your little thing and down here, okay? Next slide. This is what Tiller did. Hold this slide. Hold this slide. So I talked to Tiller, and he said, whoa, yeah, talk some more. I think you're onto something. You see, I'm a student of Dr. Hawkins, and I said, there are levels of consciousness, even your instruments, they can't go over there. I mean, Buddha is like he's an avatar, I mean, you're not an avatar yet, but anyway, he got the joke. He said, okay. He did something. He wrote an intention. And this is exactly what he wrote. We respectfully request that this excess thermodynamic free energy of this loving kindness essence be made manifest in this space, in that casita, so that we can experimentally measure its thermodynamic activity. He asked this device sitting in the casita. And this is what happened. Next. This is when nothing is happening. You can see, weeks, nothing. I'm going, oh my God, this is horrible. And then I get the insight, and he writes that statement, and then look at what happened to the pH. It took off like a rocket. And he even called me, Nisha, the pH has gone crazy. It's going up. I said, whoa. Next slide. Next slide. When he started to take off, we only kept the meter on for about 2 weeks. We got our answer. It would have kept going, but he changed 2 pH units in 2 weeks. That's huge. Now you can have some calculations. Now we can put some numbers to that loving kindness. Next slide. So we go back to that 2 pH units. We know it needs about 60 milli-electron volts to change that pH. The pressure in the casita didn't change, the volume didn't change, the internal energy didn't change, the thermal thing you can calculate, and it would have required 700 degrees centigrade to produce that pH change. It's like love was actually it burns, okay? But, so what happened? Next. It wasn't thermal, it wasn't pressure, it wasn't volume, it wasn't the E term, it was entropic. Next slide. In thermal energy terms, the effect is very large, okay? And exceeds that achievable by a human imprinted IHD. The relics are very powerful. Very powerful. Next. And it's not an internal energy. It's entropic. Those relics carry information. Your emotion, that love, is informational. Information is not just zeros and ones of Shannon. It's much, much more than that. Information is very much a physical thing because you make it physical. Okay? Next. So this is what I call thermodynamics of love. We have a way to measure this thing. And it's Buddha's consciousness in a form of a relic. And that we have some parallels between Tiller science and the Buddha's relics that inform us. That consciousness is much, much more. But it also is lawful with a thermodynamic, that science. It wasn't quantum, it's none of that. And I'm sure that if you did quantum mechanical and differential equations, I'm sure we could go there, but that's awfully hard to do on a tabletop. Okay? This is tabletop. We're putting things on, you know, it's simple. Well, simple to me. Okay. So essentially, this is the second law, and basically we're saying, what Tiller is saying is that you need all of the information. Anytime you generate new information, you reduce disorder. Our cells, when they're talking to each other and exchanging chemicals, they're actually talking to each other. This isn't just chemical exchanges. It's like an informational exchange is happening. But we don't think like that in biochemical terms, although they're getting there. Next slide. So for me as a medical doctor, this is how I see things, you know. I'm here, chemical medicine, very important. You need chemicals. I'm not saying you do away with that, but we have to use them wisely. But we have to make our patients aware of their biofields, the acupuncture system. Teach them Tai Chi and yoga. Have them really do those disciplines. And when my patients do that, they stop calling me. Okay? They become self-efficacy. It's called they're able to take care of themselves. Then you have information medicine, which is what Tiller is doing, and finally you have spirit. And there's a cascade of healing effects from spirit all the way down. But there's increasing power as you go from chemistry to acupuncture, intention, and spirit. This is what it's really trying to say. But notice, again, chemistry is not less important. I just want to emphasize that. I use chemistry all the time. But I take time to tell my patients about these other aspects that they are in charge. And I could tell you so many stories of my patients, but time doesn't permit me. Next slide. But I want to tell you just very briefly about something that Tiller is doing, and we call it information medicine. Next slide. We have said that this thing is stable, metastable, about 6 months or so, this thing, right, the device. So could you then take that science from the pH and all of that and actually affect a living system, living far away? Because it's non-local. These effects, subtle energies, are non-local. They're not electromagnetic. They don't decay over thousands of miles. And so he did a project for autistic children. And, you know, we don't do very well with autism in modern medicine. We think that these children are sick and that we need to do this or put chemical or behavior there. I mean, they're all okay, but we haven't found why these children have autism or what to do really about it. So with Susie Miller, she's a speech therapist in Scottsdale. And in fact, this is very interesting. The children told Susie, contact Bill Tiller. And she says, who's Bill Tiller? And so she has these kids who actually told her, these children somehow, and this is where I go, they're entangled with Tiller, entanglement effects. So anyway, Susie got in touch with Tiller, and they set up an experiment. which is ongoing. And autistic children, one of the big things that lags in these kids is speech. They cannot speak. They take a long delay. And so, next slide. So Tiller got to work. He wrote a very specific intention statement to help the children and a separate statement to help the parents, because the parents go through a lot of stress looking after these kids. So the children, there were about 40 of all ages. I think the youngest was 3 and the oldest was 15. They imprinted, 4 of them around a table in Payson, Arizona, at the Tiller Labs. And the device was kept there in a shed. In a shed, okay? The device is like that. And the computer scrolls the names and addresses of the 40 children. I mean, okay? Next slide. So you can see the black star is in Arizona. Next slide. And the information is broadcast throughout the globe. Whoever signed that consent form receives that information. It's a form of subtle energy. And the kids were in Finland, Australia, New Zealand, yes, all over the United States. Immediately the IHD was switched on and the computer is scrolling in that shed, The first parents to call Susie were from Australia, and they said, I don't know, our little girl does not hug anyone. She's very isolated. She sits on a rocking horse or whatever. This kid, they do repetitive behaviors. And that kid, for the first morning, said, Mama, I love you. And Tiller started to cry when he received the news. Mama started to speak, could hug, could sleep. They don't sleep very well. So there's the whole thing of fatigue and confusion in these households. So we gathered data. They did the autism treatment checklist. It's an ATEC. It's a validated form next. So this thing really improved these kids. I mean, it was presented at a national meeting, or rather international meeting. But there's a problem, and I think you may have already gathered. There was no control. How can you do control in an experiment like this? Would you ethically do that? And besides, we know that these things, if you have subtle energy, human energy is not blocked by a plexiglass or a glass or Buddha's relics in Kushinagar in India, where they're being housed in a new Maitreya statue with the objective to radiate that love, okay? Not to be kept in a case, but to really radiate. The mystics know this physics. They already know. It'll reach where it needs to reach. You cannot do controls. The controls are lost. And I haven't gone into that science of controls and scientific protocols, but the problem here that the reviewers of the paper saw was there's no control. And so it's not been published in a full-length article, which is a real pity, because I think when you have the first new innovative way to find something, it takes great courage for editors, for people like me to sit down and see, what is this physics behind this? Because it's physics, it's not just medicine. And we have to reach across the aisle to other scientific disciplines to really make headway, or we're going to be stuck in chemistry and genetics and immunotherapies and all of these wonderful things we're doing, but it is limited. And I think this, you know how much it costs? An average cost for an autistic kid to have special schooling and all of the doctor visits is hundreds of thousands of dollars. Tiller broadcast to these 40 kids, and I think it was $25 for the year. What if you received your medicine this way 24/7 by a device, and we've done this for certain. Loneliness is another one, self-compassion project. I did this for one of my patients who had arthritis so badly, he gave up. And when I left the clinic, I gave him to one of my colleagues, one of the top in the world, a world's expert. And he called me and said, Nisha, I give you permission to do whatever you want with Mr. J.S. Mr. J.S. called me in Arizona, and I said, okay. He says, I know you're doing this crazy physics stuff, but I'm ready to do anything. So in his case, we worked with him and said, what are your goals? What are your health goals? He says, I don't want any more pain. I want to improve my heart health. I want to be able to ski. He lives in Minneapolis. So we put those things down, and Tiller revised the statement until it felt right, until it felt peaceful. And then it was imprinted. And that device was shipped over to Minnesota, and the gentleman receives it and puts it in his home. Personalized medicine. Personalized medicine. So I called JS. It took a while, but 3 years. But I called him. I check in with him to get the data, and he said, "Well, Dr. Manek, I just don't know, but for no apparent reason, my pain's gone." I said, "What do you mean it's gone? Gone? He says, "Yeah, I'm back in the gym, and my muscles have come back." And he couldn't write. He couldn't hold a pen. Okay, you couldn't do things. He's a lawyer. He's a smart guy. He says, I just want to tell you that for no apparent reason, and he has not had the biologic treatment, which is what we give for arthritis. These are very high, engineered molecules to reduce arthritis activity. He hadn't had biologics for almost 2.5 years. I have never seen a remission like that. Never. I have been in rheumatology for 20 years or so. We see healings, spontaneous healings in cancer. We do hear that there are those case reports, but not in arthritis. It's really surprising. Somehow in arthritis, those spontaneous remissions, I haven't seen in his condition ever. So he's in remission. He's cured. Okay, this is very, and we've gone through what could have happened. It's an inside-out healing. It's not from the outside in. With modern medicine, we change chemistry and we do things outside. We do operations, change joints, we give steroids, whatever, but it's an outside-in process. With information healing, it's an inside-out. And you could tell Mr. JS was reporting things. But one thing he didn't notice, I asked him many times, what do you notice about the space in your home? He says, I don't know, it feels the same to me. I don't know if it was very subtle, but whatever. He is in remission after hundreds of thousands of dollars of medical care. He just said, I'll do what I'll do this. Crazy as it is, I just somehow feel moved to do it. So we had many phone calls with Tiller, and we narrowed down the intention statement. And this is where the patient and the healer, which is Tiller, collaborated. How many times do you hear that in medicine? Where the doctor says, what are your goals? What do you want? What do you think the obstacles are? And it was incredible. He's so joyful. He's just retired, and he's now in his cabins and getting ready for winter, but for the first time can move. So this is awesome. This is what I'm calling information medicine. Okay, next slide. So this is just to say there's no decay. This is not electromagnetism, which decays over, there's a formula for that. And it goes, there's no block. You can put concrete or it cannot stop human emotion. These are subtle energies. Next. So I had to put that up there. Next. So the bottom line, develop your gifts of intentionality. Get really clear. Reduce the noise in your mind. You cannot waver and change every 10 seconds, which is really what I do. You're very muddy and really fast, and next thing and the next thing. But Tiller, one thought, thy will be done. Show me the truth, literally. So you can take these lessons. They're not that hard. Next, my teacher, Dr. David Hawkins, and I think we're in a very interesting place in human history. We've been Homo erectus, started walking on 2 legs, then we developed a beautiful brain, Homo sapiens, but we're now evolving into Homo spiritus, Homo illumini, Homo universalis. These are all different Homo this, Homo bigger in consciousness from various teachers I've had, and none of them knew the other one. They're all telling me these things. I thought, oh, this is awesome. Homo illumini, Homo universalis, in our lifetime, regardless what the media says. Okay? The underneath realities, we are waking up and fast. Next. So, our consciousness is evolving. My teacher Vimala says a radical mutation. She means, her word mutation really signifies a change. We are in for a radical change in the quality of human consciousness. And we, you, because ions, is preparing the ground. You wouldn't be here if you weren't preparing the ground. Why would you spend 7 p.m. listening to some person talking about relics? But you're here. You're preparing the ground. So we are responsible for that. Next. We met His Holiness the Dalai Lama some years back, and Lama Zopa was the director of the tour. So Tiller, that's him on the right, and talking to Lama Zopa there. And Lama Zopa said, yeah, I agree. We need to do experiments on the relics because it is a question of consciousness. It's a vital clue. They get it. Funding is always the issue. You need time, but anyway, he was very happy that we were doing this. Next slide. So it's in the Kurukula Buddhist Center in Boston. Next slide. Okay. I welcome your questions. Thank you for your attention. Thank you so much, really. Tashi Delay.